Hello, Richard Kaplan here with Studio Rad HQ and StudioRadHQ.com. Just wanted to give a little show of some prized pieces of vintage equipment. In this particular situation, we have two Teletronics leveling amplifiers. A very early one, an LA2, and the later, more common predecessor, the LA2A. I preferred the LA2 because it didn't have all of the protection circuitry and features necessary for FM radio broadcast, and had a very open and clean circuit. This particular one is the one that at Indigo Ranch was not only used on many or not most vocals, but was in rare instances rented out. And the only party that we would ever rent it out to was usually Neil Young, because he demanded having this particular LA2 compressor limiter on his vocals. It was the only limiter that he would allow. And although he usually didn't like having any effects on any of his instruments or vocals, he realized that this gave an added robustness to his vocals. You can see there's marks on this particular LA2 that were put there by his engineering team. I wouldn't dare mark on a piece of gear like this, but these marks have ended up becoming near and dear to our hearts because of their origin. Now, this is the simplest of all compressors to use. It requires basically that you listen to what's happening. And that is the most important tool for any engineer in any equipment usage, is to listen. Not to just have some setting that's been scribed onto the front as being the setting that worked last time, because there are so many variables, you can't depend on that being the ideal setting for any particular vocal or guitar or whatever you're using it on. These things are wonderful on almost any instrument because they have a unique way of bringing about the leveling process. Basically, you can think of a limiter or compressor as being a box with a guy inside who's got his hand on the fader. And when he sees a big one coming, he brings the fader down real quick so that it doesn't overload or distort the tape or radio transmitter or whatever it is that it's connected to, or mix down, whatever. So basically, it's a robot inside a box who's going to bring the fader down when the level gets too high. And there's many ways of doing it. These two early Teletronics, which later became UA, Universal Audio, had what's called a T4A attenuator, which looks like a tube, a metal tube, but inside it was a light bulb and a photocell. And the photocell was hooked up to an amplifier inside the box that was connected to the input signal. And the light would get brighter and brighter as the level got hotter and hotter, and the photocell would read that brightness, and as such, as the light got brighter past a certain threshold, it would bring the fader down, as it were. Basically, this is a limiter with only two controls in its early form. One is the gain, which was controlling the gain of the instrument coming into it. It wasn't output gain, it was input gain. And the second control being peak reduction, and this control would decide when looks like a regular VU meter, but it's actually the opposite of a VU meter. It's a gain reduction meter which is normally at 0, which means that there's no gain reduction happening. Whatever the input is passing straight through the box without any change whatsoever, except for the fact that it's gone through some additional electronics, which in this case happen to be very good electronics with good transformers and really good clean tube circuitry, and all it's imparting is a little bit of that tube sound to it. But normally the meter sits at 0. As you bring the gain reduction knob up, you'll reach a point where the meter starts to deflect slightly, and the more you bring it up, the more it deflects, showing how much gain is being pulled off, how much the robot inside the box is pulling the fader down. And that's why it's so important to listen, because in some cases you don't want this working except on extreme peaks, such as in a vocal, where you only want the peaks pulled down a little bit and the rest of the dynamics to be controlled by the vocalists themselves. And in some cases you want to literally squash it down there so that you're getting a lot of the tube limiter sound. So the higher you bring this up, as you listen to it and carefully decide what is the place where it actually sounds the best. The same thing is true of the LA2A, the successor to the LA2. It has input gain and gain reduction, where that input gain reaches a point where it starts to deflect the meter. There's also a third knob on this, but it really has nothing to do with the sound. This knob merely controls what the meter is doing. So in its standard and almost always used upright position, it's showing gain reduction, how many dBs the robot inside is pulling the fader down. In this position, notice the meter suddenly flipped to 0. It's showing the output gain after everything, after the gain reduction, which you were seeing in the upright position and so forth, is showing you, just like a normal VU meter on a console or tape machine or any other device, it's showing you what the output level of the device is at +10 level. In the right-hand position, it's showing you the output gain at +4, which has become the radio and studio standard level for reading gain. So when +4, when you were still going off into the red on +4, you could flip over to +10, which would bring the meter down another 6 dB, so you could actually tell up to +10 plus the 3 dB plus the meter reads of what the actual output was. So up until +13, you were getting an accurate VU meter reading of what's going on. Typically it's left in the gain reduction position where the meter flips back to 0 again, and you're listening, the most important tool you have, with your ears to the sound that's coming out of the gain reduction unit. Thank you, Richard Kaplan, Studio Rat HQ, giving a short demo and description of the Teletronics limiters.